Hello, and welcome to another episode of Not D&D, which is brought to you by EN Live, part of EN World, the leading tabletop news and review site. I'm your host, Jessica Hancock, and with me this week, I have the wonderful guest with me, Alex. Alex, please would you introduce yourself?
Hi there, I'm Alex. I live a little way north of London. My day job is relatively boring, but I've been interested in RPGs for many years, and so I'd say my hobby is now creating and publishing games.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Really excited to be talking about your game. The last 2 weeks we had kind of pre-recorded sessions due to scheduling issues, but we are in fact live right now as I speak. So if you have any questions, please pop them in the chat where you're watching and we will happily answer them for you. So it can be a little bit more interactive and back like we're used to this week. So the first question I have, Alex, which I ask all guests, is what is your first experience with tabletop RPGs? When did you start playing? What was the first game you played?
It's I can tell you that it was in May 1976.
Oh, specifically know the date. Okay.
Specifically know the date because there's an issue of Games and Puzzles magazine that had a 2-page article in about Dungeons and Dragons. A little bit of blurb about it, a little example dungeon, and I read it and I thought, this is amazing. And then I looked at the price of it and I found that was well out of reach of my pocket money. So I got together with a friend and I wrote a page of rules so that we could play a game with dungeons. So my first experience of a role-playing game was a homemade thing with the idea of you go down dungeons. I knew you might have a +1 sword or a +1 shield, and you'd roll the dice. And I made up some rules, and we had fun with that until we were able to actually save up money to buy a game.
And then did you save up and buy the Dungeons and Dragons proper game?
The first game I bought was actually Metamorphosis Alpha.
Oh, really? Okay.
That was cheaper than D&D.
Okay, price matters. Okay.
The first D&D book I bought was the little supplement one, Greyhawk, which was they introduced paladins and thieves and different hit die sizes for classes and level 7, 8, 9 spells for wizards. And so we used that, and we then kind of worked out what the other rules must be in order to work with these ones.
Okay, so with your existing rules you'd already written, you kind of just added it in. Nice, yeah. I like that. So you've been designing and making games as soon as you've found out about them.
Yeah, tinkering has been absolutely my whole life with games.
Excellent. And so that was kind of where you started, but how did that transition into kind of what you're doing now? As you say, kind of on the side, you're running plain sailing games and making all these cool things that we're talking about. How did that start for you?
It came from the second game I played was RuneQuest, which I absolutely loved. So much so that I did RuneQuest versions of Empire of the Petal Throne and Dark Sun and some other properties, and I did a science fiction version of it, which I played for many years with friends, and we refined it. And this became Starguild, which around about 2014, 2015, I've been working on it for 28 years. And I thought, am I going to actually try and publish this or not? Because while it was in the state of a work in progress, that was safe. There was no risk of failure there. And I realized that I didn't want to end up in my old age, sitting in a chair, regretting that I'd never tried it out. And so my first Kickstarter in 2016 was Starguild Space Opera Noir, up there, which was successfully kickstarted. And the process was hair-raising and difficult, but it worked. I got it printed, got it out to people, and I was really pleased. I was getting that people were interested in something I produced. I got started. I got started work on the next supplement, which then had a delay of 5 years because I just kept getting other ideas I wanted to do something with.
Right, okay.
And those other ideas, really, the germ of those came from the game Grey Ranks by
Yes,
Bully Pulpit Press. Yeah,
I
it was.
love that game. It's not for everyone, but I've played it and I
Yeah,
love it. Could you, if for people that don't know about Grey Ranks, could you give a little summary of it? So,
yeah. It was the first story game that I ever came across, and it's set in a specific historical period, and it's the Warsaw Uprising in World War II.
yeah.
And in particular, it's about the 16, 17, 18-year-olds in the kind of this children's army. Now, we historically know that the Warsaw Uprising was crushed by the Nazis, but
Hmm.
you're playing these teenagers who don't know that, and
Yeah.
they're struggling with their feelings because you're teenagers and your feelings are developing, but you're struggling against the oppressors. And in the game, we played it was on a one shot, so we played a series of the vignettes, not the whole thing through. But you would frame scenes, people would play parts out in the scenes, and at the end we had an epilogue where we considered what had happened to these characters in the end.
Yeah.
And I remember at the end of that, I was just sitting there, and with my chest felt really tight, and a couple of the other people we'd been moved by these characters in a way that I'd never experienced in a game before. I
Yeah.
love playing RPGs for the exploration, for the fun, for the repartee, but this was the first time that showed me that you could have real feelings, particularly when it was based
Yeah.
around a historical event.
Yeah. I agree. I think because in that game you're playing, and much like in your game we're going to talk about in a bit, you're playing fictional characters that you've created, but this is a real life situation, and there were real people that were in that situation and would have experienced that. So I think that's why it gives it that feeling, because you're like, oh, this did really happen. And of course, I think when you're playing Grey Ranks, it's not going to end well. And so that makes you think when you're playing the game, so that they're for knowledge. But yeah, okay.
I did think that Grey Ranks was such a lovely system that could be used for other things as well. And with Jason Morningstar's permission, I did a play set for Innsmouth Summer Camp, teenagers in the village of Innsmouth with the Deep Ones rising, and with all the kind of background settings for that. Because there you've got you could have a situation with teenagers, and your body is changing, you're developing hair, and are these gills? And it gave us a really good setting. The one of the core mechanics in the game is a grid where, depending upon how success or failure has happened with missions, you move around the grid, and if you end up in a corner, then that's where you get written out. And I found that that basic framework that was produced for Grey Ranks worked really well for another game setting, and that one's been, my rules for that have been translated into Japanese, which was delightful.
Okay. So are the details of that on your website if people want to take a look at that one?
Yes,
or?
yeah, on the website they've got the details there. You have to buy Grey Ranks for the rules for using it, but this is sort of a play set of all the prompts and the campfire stories, which are the equivalent to the lightning radio talks.
Okay, great. And that's on plainsailing.games.com there, so you can check that up there. But yeah, so you kind of started doing that. You did that Kickstarter, and then did that lead onto A Cool and Lonely Courage as well, which is another one of your games I'm very interested in.
It absolutely did. Each summer I have the huge pleasure of going along to a small house con over in America, and it would be about 2017 that I had a chat with somebody, and we happened to be talking about the bravery of people some of the women in World War II who were overlooked. And I remembered some stories which I'd heard about the women spies of the SOE. And in the F section, sent into France, there were women who were trained with all the commando skills that the men had as well. And they were sent out to be radio operators and to be couriers. The person who was in charge of training said that he thought women were particularly good for this role because they had a cool and lonely courage, hence the name of the game.
Okay.
And I was on my flight home, and I thought, I wonder if I could do a game about that. But I knew that a third of the women who went out there died. They were either killed or they were captured, sent to the concentration camps and died. And so I felt that I wanted to frame it so that the game starts and you've been captured, but you're going to use flashbacks to tell the story of your arrival in France, going a mission, a kind of slice of life interlude, how you were captured, and what happened in prison. And I was then thinking, well, I wonder how I can have a game element to that. And this was all before I fell asleep on the flight home. But I thought I could use playing cards because you've got your 4 suits, and if I align each of the suits with an emotional feeling. So if there's a heart, then you'll have a scene that revolves around love. If you have a diamond, then a scene that revolves around success in some way. A club, then there's a failure or misfortune. If there's a spade, then somebody died, not you, because these are flashbacks. You're safe at the moment. But as you set the scenes, we introduce characters who get played by the other players, and we write them down on index cards. If a spade comes up and somebody dies, then you're going to pick one of the people that you've been building a relationship with, and they're the person that dies in that scene.
Oh,
but
wow.
you introduce another character who is affected by that death. The scenes can be a combination of narrative and role play, depending on what the demands of the situation look like. In an early play test, we had a mission scene, and I drew a spade, and so we said, okay, what happens is this: my radio operator went out, she laid out her radio aerial in the fields, and there was a teenage boy came along to act as a spotter. And the teenage boy saw some Germans, and he said, "Don't worry, I'll draw them off." He runs across the field shouting, and they gun him down. And he's dead. I then come back and meet his father and have to tell him he's died. And then we role played out that scene of telling his father that. We found that I had to put a lot of work into the safety things, the safety rules at the start of the game.
Yes,
because there's so much possibility. You're talking about potentially rather horrible things, and
definitely.
It's supposed to be a game which is engaging, but doesn't hurt people.
Of course.
And so, you have to be careful how you do the things, particularly when you're dealing with literal Nazis.
Yes. Yeah. So what sort of safety mechanics do you advise kind of in the games to make sure that, because obviously, like you say, it's talking about war, it's talking about real life themes that are not great, and there might be some kind of barriers people want to put into place and make sure that everybody has a comfortable time, and it's not crossing any lines for anybody in the story they want to tell.
Absolutely right. So the two ones I set out in this, which we found helpful, were the lines and veils and X card, which I'm sure will be familiar to many people. But lines and veils, a line is something you say, we just don't go there. And a veil is that kind of happens off screen. So for instance, we might say, I don't want any torture of children. Children can die, but that happens off screen, and that would be a veil. Or it could be that, for instance, there might be romance that comes up. You might say, actually, I don't mind romance or the possibility of sex, but there's a veil there. It happens off screen.
Just like in a movie when it pans to the curtain, just
exactly.
Yeah.
So everyone knows what's going on. That's fine. And the X
Yeah.
card is if at any point somebody says, "Oh, I'm not happy with that." So okay, let's pause. Let's reframe that. Start again. We've also said used the rule that remember the door is always open. And once when I've been running the game, and once when I've seen the game being run, somebody's got to a point where they said, "I'm sorry, I've just got to step away from this," and that is absolutely fine. You can step away, look after yourself. It's not going to hurt anybody else's experience. It's not going to wreck the game. You can just step off.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good to know that the safety is kind of built in with those kind of, especially when you're dealing with those sorts of themes and things. Lines and veils I find really useful in any game I run, even if I'm playing a D&D game with a group of people, especially people I've not played with before. I always do lines and veils beforehand, just in case somebody's got a phobia of spiders or something.
Yes.
And they don't want them in the game. Or, it could be anything as simple as that. But I think in these sorts of games where you're dealing with real world issues and things, it's really good to have safety mechanics in. So I'm really glad you brought that up. Yeah.
One of the things that I tried to do through this game is to put in examples of the real women who are there. We had a bit earlier a picture of some of the cards, and in each of the sessions, each of the chapters, on each of those cards, that's a real story about a real woman. And you can read in the book. I've just done a thumbnail sketch of people like Christina Scarbeck and Nancy Wake, Odette Sansom, women who withstood astonishing opposition, who carried on going no matter what. I found that I was both challenged and encouraged by what they did. People who came from ordinary walks of life. Somebody might have been a shop girl or a secretary, and yet when it came to it, they were their courage was absolutely undeniable. That's a picture of Virginia Hall. She was an American who wanted to work for the American diplomatic service, but she'd got a wooden leg. And so they said, well, you've got a wooden leg, you're a cripple, you can't do anything, and you're a woman.
Right.
So she was at a party in London, and she heard about the recruiting for the SOE. She was fluent in French. She was trained with them, went over to France. She was known as the Limping Lady, and she was right at the top of Himmler's hit list for people who want to get, because she was so good at organizing the men, at arranging escape routes for people. It was absolutely remarkable what she did. She was one of the ones who survived the war and went on to work for the OSS and then the CIA. Others sadly didn't have such a good ending.
Of course.
And that's one of the crucial twists at the end of the game, is that because everyone's been given dealt a hand of cards, and you don't know what your hand of cards is. Each chapter you draw a card to see what's happening, and at the end of the game everyone's got one card left. Right. And you then decide, do you want to keep your card, or do you want to donate your card to somebody else? Because at the end of the game, if you've got two cards in your hand because people are donating them to you, you escaped successfully. If you've got no cards, you were murdered in jail. If you had one card, you went to the concentration camps, and you either survived or you didn't there. And it's quite a crucial decision to make. Whose story that's been developed do you want to see come to have a happy ending at last? And the final thing is an epilogue where we say about what happened to the people afterwards, or how were they remembered, because even those who died are remembered. And in the book I have the list of all of the women who served in F section, including whether they survived or not, because as much as I'd like people to play this game and enjoy it, I'd
Yeah.
like them to reflect upon some of the women who did it for real,
Yeah.
and remember them. It was very important to me to be respectful to the real people it was based on.
Definitely. It sounds like that comes through in the game. We've had a question here. Somebody said that they love your games, which is nice, first of all. And obviously you've touched on this a little bit, but they're interested in about the research process for a game like A Cool and Lonely Courage, and also Love and Barbed Wire, which we're just about to go into talk about. So what is your research process like with getting all the information about these real life people and getting them in the book?
I like reading. I find books about it. I look for historical accounts, and I look for fictional ones on the setting. So for historical accounts, there's about 5 or 6 books that I've got. Some of them looking at particular women. One of them looking at Leo Marx, who was the chap who was responsible for the codes which were used by the women. And fictional stories like Codename Verity, or there's one to a movie recently. I'm trying to remember. I write down my research in the book, so if anybody wants to look up, I talk about for background reading, the historical things I've looked at and the fiction. Charlotte Gray was the film I was thinking of.
Oh, right, yeah, okay.
And similarly for Love and Barbed Wire, I tried to do a lot of research into World War I, what was happening, what life was like in the trenches, what life was like on the home front. Sometimes there's information available on websites, particularly if it's part of the national curriculum in the UK, and then there's information you can find out there. Otherwise, I follow historians on Twitter. My Twitter is kind of about 10% scientists, 30% historians, and then 60% game designers. But the historians are so useful, helpful, sometimes through interaction with them directly, but because they're talking about bits of history, you can find out which are the best books to look at. So I have a library of books for things I'm looking at. I'm currently, as I'm looking to the future, I'm reading books about suffragettes, because
amazing.
I want to do something about suffragettes and the deeds, not words. Courage calls to courage. I think there's something useful we can learn today from the things that women were prepared to go through to win the vote just over 100 years ago. But that's some of the early stages of research for that one.
Oh, okay. Well, I think I answered that question very well. So we've kind of talked about it a little bit here. So I'm going to bring us on to talk about the main thing that we're here to talk about today, in Love and Barbed Wire. Before I do that, I will mention, though, that A Cool and Lonely Courage we're talking about just before, it was nominated in the Best Game category for the Ennies in 2020. So congratulations for that nomination there. That must have been quite fun and exciting to have it so well received.
Yeah, it's absolutely delightful. I didn't have any hope of winning, because who knew me? But to be nominated meant that the judges had looked through several hundred games and felt that this game was worthy of putting in front of a wider audience, and that was really special.
That's really, and I think it's great. I think the mechanics are kind of unique and different from what you come across in RPGs, but also I think the theme is something that really spoke to me, and it was the same with Love and Barbed Wire. So could you give us a little summary about Love and Barbed Wire?
Yes. So Love and Barbed Wire is the fancy word would be is an epistolary game. But basically it's a letter writing game. And the thought occurred to me. I was traveling back from Metatopia a couple of years ago, 2019, and I thought, I wonder what you could do with a game where you're actually taking in turns to do something. And I know that in World War One, because of the fixed nature of trench warfare, there was millions of letters flowing backwards and forwards between the home front and the front line. And I thought, I wonder if there's a story to be told about what it's like for two people separated in distance over time to build, to see what happens with their relationship. And there's a fabulous book that I bought which is full of love letters from World War
Oh
One.
wow.
And as you read these, you could see some of them there was true love. Some of them people had obviously fallen out of love. There's one awful one where a woman writes to chap and she says, I'm leaving you. I've met somebody else. Everybody else comes home occasionally, but you being a prisoner of war, you never come back. And so I'm going to put the children into an orphanage and go off with this other man. Don't give a rat's ass about them. I think,
oh wow.
somebody got this letter. But there's also so many times when the letter writing ended, where somebody would write a letter and all they'd get back is a terse telegram that somebody had fallen in battle. So I felt that there's a game here where we could have some genuine emotional content, but there is that potential for a real element of drama in there as well. Will your love survive the war? The war took place over 4 years, but I kind of divided it into 5 thematic chapters, aligned with seasons. Go through winter, spring, summer, autumn, winter, and so it starts off with everybody went off to war thinking it'll all be over by Christmas. It was all feeling very positive. And so with each of the chapters, I've given one of the war poems. Sorry, excuse my hands. I can't stop waving them.
No, that's fine. I do that too.
One of the war poems from some of these the soldiers who died in World War One, but there's some amazing poems. So I picked a poem which was fit the theme for each chapter. So the first chapter is we'll all be home by Christmas. The second chapter, we're somewhere in France. Third chapter is where your emotions start to deepen. The fourth chapter is when it's all over, this is what we'll do. And then the last chapter is our darkest days. So as each time you write, then you're influenced by the theme of the chapter, and you've got a deck of cards. So you randomly draw a card, and that gives you something about the emotional theme. So if it's love, heart, you're writing of love, how much you love them, the things which you love about them. If it's diamonds, then you're writing about how impressed you are, their courage, the marvelous things about them. If it's a club, then it's the person at home writes about their fears, and if it's on the front, then they talk about how horrible it is. And if there's a spade, the first time a spade is drawn, then it's either an injury at the front or it's somebody who's started falling out of love at home.
Okay.
So then you get to the second chapter and you're replying to the first letter, informed by the theme of the chapter and the draw of a new card. And this gives you a real variability as the game goes on. No two games will ever end up the same.
Yeah, I can imagine.
There was one playtest where the first 2 cards that the soldier drew were a spade and a spade, and he actually died in the second chapter, which they found was shocking, but felt in a way quite real.
Yeah, I imagine that happened. Yeah.
We've had some games where the loved one back home has fallen out of love, and they stop writing, and the soldier keeps writing back to them, but they get no response back.
Oh.
It's again a heartbreaking situation, but very real. And one of the things that comes from this way of running the game is that you can play it together. You can sit across a table, and then you write. But we have 5-minute timer for writing. It forces you to be kind of terse and rushed, and then you take in turns to read for that chapter, and then you go on to the next chapter, and that works really well over Zoom. It could equally well be played with real mail. I've played it with somebody over email. I know somebody's played it with a shared document where they take it in turns to write in the document. Well, you get the opportunity for your messages to cross in the post, as it were, when you're playing it face to face or over Zoom.
Yeah.
And I found that when you've got a group of 4 people, you can set up 2 pairs, and then you're hearing kind of 2 sets of conversations. So it's worked
Yeah.
well in quite a lot of situations.
Yeah. So yeah, that sounds really interesting. I love the ideas for the stories and things you can tell by doing it this way, and the mechanics seem really great with it here. We've had someone, Kevin's commented that they've seen this sort of mechanic in different games, and the system works so spectacularly well. So it seems like some fans for the system there as well. What other kind of things do you have in terms of the system? So it seems like in order to play the game, you need some sort of timer and a deck of cards. Is there anything else you need? Any other preparation for the
No,
game?
no other preparation at all, really.
Oh, wow.
Sometimes people might approach it and think, I don't really know much about the setting, about that bit of history. So I
Yeah.
have tried to give a digested view of history, what it was like in the trenches, and what the home front was like in different countries. So not just Britain, but in France, in Germany, in India, which is often overlooked.
Yeah.
And so if you can give people the hooks they can use as they are making things up. And one of the things I tell people to do in the game is to liberally make up people. Yeah. Somebody writing says, oh, I heard from your brother. And it's okay,
Yeah.
suddenly you've got a brother there. And the brother can then come up in future letters. And it can be a soldier and their loved one. It could be their fiance. It could be their wife. But it could be a child they're writing to. Or you could have a gay couple who have to write carefully because they know the censors will read everything.
Oh,
So
yeah.
they're writing to say what they can't say. Or there were women who were near the front line as nurses, and so you could have a woman on the front line writing to their loved one back home, a husband or a child. So there's a lot of different angles that you can take with this as well.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I think that's interesting, that comment you made about queer couples as well, because yeah, I guess being separated and writing during that time would have been really difficult because that wasn't really an accepted thing there. But yeah, so I
No.
really like that take on it, that the game's flexible enough to kind of do that. What was your sort of inspiration for wanting to write this game and this sort of system? I think I remember you saying your grandfather was in the war.
Yes. My grandfather, who died in 1937, so I never knew him, but he was in the war in the Bedfordshire Yeomanry. There's a number of. I've tried to have a lot of photographs. Part of the money I use from the Kickstarter is raised in order to buy the rights to use photographs in it. But there's quite a lot of photographs I've got which are from his war diaries,
Oh, wow.
including one of the pictures in there is of my grandmother, who he met at a dance in Framlingham in Suffolk. And so he met during the war, and they wrote to each other during the war, and after the war, they got together and got married.
Oh.
I have a photograph in there of his orders from the when the armistice was signed. He still has. Well, I have the original bit of paper which it was on. I took a photograph of that and included it in there. And
Nice.
one of the things that's on my mind is that it's very easy to forget people. It's very easy to forget the sacrifices that people have made, as the generations from World War II now are getting fewer and fewer. We can
Yes.
forget what people have done to kind of pay for freedom. It also, I think, is a helpful reminder for me about how powerful writing is. Back in the 1990s, my wife and I, we wrote letters to one another. She wasn't on email, and I've still got those letters. In fact, we've got letters that were written by her grandfather to her mother. And there's a tangibility to letters, which I think we sometimes lose track of now. And if it's encouraged people to think, oh, actually, I think I might like to write to somebody, write to one of
Yeah.
my good friends, I think that would be quite a nice outcome from it.
Yeah, I think so, definitely. I think there is something about letter writing that feels more romantic as well. Like, for
Yeah,
example, there's not something quite as wistful as looking back through the text messages with your other half from when you were first dating. Whilst maybe this,
yeah,
similar information and vibe, it doesn't quite have the
yes, it's
same
not quite the
romance.
same.
Yeah, that has
Yeah.
there. So that's yes, I like that, and I love that there's that personal link you have with it there,
Mm,
and that you've put your family history into it.
mm.
I think it's Bran, were you working on this during COVID and during lockdown? Because there's that element of
Yes,
distance there that kind of parallels.
yeah, very much so.
Mhm,
Um, I do find I love the the Metatopia convention that happens in November
mhm,
each year over in, I believe it's New Jersey. I
mhm,
went to that twice before COVID, and
mhm.
each time it's been super valuable for testing your games out with people,
Yeah,
designers who give really helpful critique. Um, but the first time, Love and Barbed Wire's first test was when Metatopia was online because of COVID. Turns out worked very well for online play.
yeah. Oh, we lost you a little bit there, Alex. I think you're coming back now.
I sorry, I think my brain just kind of stopped the sentence before the sentence was finished.
Oh, okay. I think your internet just dropped a little bit there for me, but I think you're back now, so all good.
Okay.
Just like during COVID, the joys of online communication sometimes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Um, but no, that's great to hear, and I think the game struck a chord with me because I think it's very different to other things that we've seen. I really like that idea
Hmm.
of long distance. I think that's something we can all kind of relate to now because of being separated from COVID, and also now there's obviously
Yeah.
the war happening in Ukraine, which I think maybe stirs up some sort of feelings like this in
Hmm.
people as well. So I think it's, even though it's a game that's based on a setting 100 years ago, I think it's still, well, almost 100 years ago, but
Yeah.
it still has some relevance today, and some things we can take from it,
Electric
which I think
resonance
is really
for it.
interesting.
Yeah.
Very much, definitely. So if you have any questions, we are recording this live this week with Not D&D, so please ask any questions in the comments for Alex, and we'll happily answer them for you. So wherever you're watching, please type them in there. I'm going to bring us on to talk about some kind of future projects that you have lined up as well. So we've got the Inner Circle Here game that you mentioned before your work
Hmm.
you're talking about. Could you tell us what's
Yes.
this upcoming game we're looking out for?
So I have a bit of a reputation in my last two games for writing games that make people cry. And that's in a good sense.
Yes,
But
in a
I like to
cathartic
write
way.
games,
Yeah.
yeah, that help people feel. But I wanted to
Mhm.
write something that would be funny. And
Okay.
so this game is a black comedy.
Okay.
It was inspired after watching the movie Death of Stalin. Don't know
Okay.
if you've seen that, but it's Stalin dies, and you've got his inner circle. They're all backbiting and backstabbing to see who comes out on top.
Mhm.
And I thought, there's an awful lot of circumstances around the world where you can have an inner circle of terrible
Mhm.
people currying favor with a despotic
Mhm.
leader.
Mhm.
And so the mechanics of the game it's designed to be a black comedy with the
Mhm.
emphasis on black as in comedy. Uh, Something where you laugh even though you think maybe I shouldn't be laughing at this. Um,
Yeah.
the and it's a push your luck thing because you're using the I'm using playing cards again, but here in the sense of the game of pontoon or 21 or
Okay.
blackjack. No, it's not the full rules for blackjack, but
Mhm.
uh, for each turn, you
Mhm.
get a couple of cards, and I look at my cards. I've just picked up two cards here. I've got two spades.
Sure.
So I want to. So I've got a secret plan.
Mhm.
For the boss, and my plan
Mhm.
involves the death of his enemies and the death of all of the enemies' family as well. So I've got two
Oh, okay.
spades there. I might have got a heart and said, well, this makes people love you, because I was doing a massive PR campaign. And everyone goes through and talks about their plans, and then you decide, am I going to stick there, or do I want to extend my plan? Because there can only be one winner each round. And I mean, with these, I probably want to stick there. But if I assumed that I was greedy and I wanted to take another one, and I got this, then I'm adding a bit of love to my plan. But I've actually bust. I don't tell anybody I bust right now. When you've got around and everyone gets a position where everyone sticks, nobody draws anymore, we reveal the cards. The person who's got the highest card wins, and they keep their current credibility. Everyone who isn't the winner loses 1 point of credibility. If you bust, you lose 2 points of credibility. You start with about 5. When your credibility gets to 0, then you are fired, executed, covered in molten gold, whatever's the appropriate exit pattern.
Yes.
Until you play till you've got one person left. And so I've set it up with fictional settings like Lord of the Rings, where you're a bunch of orcs carrying hobbits back.
Lovely.
Flash Gordon, where people are serving Emperor Ming.
How wonderful.
Star Wars with a Dark Lord of the Sith who likes you. You get force choked if you fail him enough times. Game of Thrones, where people die all over the place in that. And I've given kind of prompts appropriate for the genre. For historical settings, you've got Emperor Nero. We've got Joseph Stalin. There was I forget the name now. There was the Madagascan Queen, under whose reign the population of Madagascar halved from 5 million to 2.5 million. She was a wicked, wicked person. We're specifically steering away from Hitler as a possibility, because I don't want people to even have a chance of saying things which might put them in a positive light. So, and don't want to joke about the Holocaust, things like that. So, leaving that on one side. Contemporary settings: Donald Trump, Boris Johnson, Vladimir Putin. Big business settings: big energy, big pharma, big tech. The newspapers are full of horrible things that they're doing, and people enjoy imagining what they can do in order to get children addicted to the new app on their phone. We're just working at the moment on some high drama, low stakes settings like office politics. High school cliques and academia.
Okay, great.
And a couple of weird settings. So there's a Hell's Kitchen setting where you're using the cards to make up ingredients for things, and will Rawdon Gamsey like your things or call you an idiot sandwich?
Okay, great. So it sounds like you got the system there that you could do whatever you want with it, but it's chock-a-block full of prompts and things already set up for you to use. That's great. When will that be coming? When will that be available, or what's the plan for that roughly?
I'm pretty much there with all the rules now. I've just got a couple of settings I want to work on. So I'm hoping to launch a Kickstarter probably towards the end of June or early July. And that's to raise money to get professional editing and for some additional internal artwork.
Excellent.
I've got some pencil sketches in myself at the moment. If I don't raise enough on the Kickstarter, pencil sketches it will be. If I do, and I can fund an artist, then that would be excellent.
Great.
As with all Kickstarters, and this is my top tip for anybody who is an indie game designer, it's really useful to spend some money up front to get logo or cover art done, something you can show people. I'm really pleased with the design that I've got for Inner Circle. It's a brilliant artist that I was able to work with. We went backwards and forwards and came up with something I'm really pleased with there.
That sounds great. And the best place for people to get news about that on when it'll go live is on plainsailinggames.com. Excellent. Great. So we can have a look at that on there. So we have some questions coming through as well based on the game. So you've used cards in all of your games. And Kevin's asked, are you planning to use other games that use the same card-based system? That was in response to Love and Barbed Wire. So using that sort of system there.
I absolutely am. I like the variability that cards give you, the ability to have to attach emotional value to particular states of card. The fact that you can have some things where you're not sure what you're going to get next, you could have them dealt out. Everyone's got a fair hand. And there's a game which I'm in the kind of late alpha stages at the moment. The working title is Expect 3 Visitors. And it came about because somebody said, could you use your game for something like Scrooge? And I thought, I think I could. And I sat down, and 2 hours later, I'd got the basic frame of the game. Scrooge was troubled by greed. So in this game, you could be troubled by any of the 7 deadly sins: sloth, wrath, greed, lust, pride, envy, and whatever the other one is. And the players will play a spirit who's got the job of trying to redeem to this person who's suffering from this deadly sin. And as you play around, everybody is the spirit to the person on their left, and they play the patient or the client to the person on their right. So you agree what the problems are going to be for the client, and then we take them back to their past, and we show them a scene from their past. And that can get played out by the other players. So the client doesn't engage, but he gets to ask questions about it. And then you take them to the current present day and then to the future. There's one of these where we knew that somebody was a widower. His problem was gluttony, which is kind of not knowing when to stop. And in this case, it was framed as he was a hoarder. His house was just full of stuff. And we took him back to the past, and we took him to the past to a hospital room, and we see him, a younger version of him 8 years ago, and in the bed is his wife, and she's dying. And she's saying, you've got to let me go, you've got to get on with your life. And he's saying, I don't want to let you go. And this sense that this was the point that triggered this hoarding for him. But while we saw this little conversation played out by 2 of the other players, and then the player who was the chap problem with gluttony said, I just go over to, I want to go away, but he can't go away. I go over to my wife in bed and just try to tuck a bit of hair behind her ear. And as the player said that, I choked up with it. But as you take people through past and present and future, you can, if you think back to the story of Scrooge, we've got him happy at a party. We've got him seeing them trying to get money together. Then there's this future where Tiny Tim has died, and he wants to know if something could be different. So the playing cards have helped set the tone for each of that past, present, and future. And then again, each of the spirits has got 1 card left. They can't keep the card themselves. They've got to give the card away to one of the other spirits. And we find out who the living tribunal judges successful, who gets rescued, who doesn't get rescued. In one game, one of the person was a wrathful person that was expressed in terrible racism, and yet he was redeemed, he was rescued, and his life was turned around. And the person playing was saying, I'm really pleased with that, because I wanted to have this idea that people are not stuck where they are, that they can be rescued. So anyway, it was a brilliant idea that somebody had, and I'm very grateful that they suggested it to me, because I think that this card mechanics works really well again for a method of framing scenes. And if I just one other word on that, Grey Ranks was this brilliant opening for me into the world of story games. But as a beginner, I found it really, really hard to understand how to frame scenes. I use these card mechanics because I think it makes it much easier for people to see how to frame a scene and
Gives
understand
you
how
a
it
prompt.
works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
I'm
That
sorry, I'm
sounds
running away
excellent.
with myself there.
No,
But
that's great.
yeah,
This is exactly
uh,
what the show is about. I invite people on to come and talk about their games. That's exactly what you've done here today. So it's absolutely perfect. Thank you. Um, we are getting a little bit close to the top of the hour, so I'm just going to run through and say if people want to hear more about your games, where would be the best places for them to find you and talk to you more about the games if they're interested.
So my website, which is on the screen earlier, there's information there where I blog about stuff and do design blogs as well as talk about the games I've got available. You can find me on DriveThruRPG and itch.io. I tend to put ash cans up on itch.io. There's an ash can for Inner Circle there at the moment. I'm moderately active on Twitter, and I'm a little active on Facebook. I find that it's difficult to get engagement on both of those, but Twitter is the one where I put more of my effort. I'm very happy to engage with people there. I think they're the main places where you'd find out from me.
Okay, great. And the website there is Plain Sailing Games, and plain spelled Plane. So the links to that will be in the show notes if you're listening to the podcast, or you can have a look on your screen if you're watching live or watching the video right now. We also can buy your things. As Indie Press Revolution is a good place to go if you'd like to purchase any of the books we talked about, because the best way to support indie tabletop RPG creators is to buy their stuff. So you can have a look there. The links are in the notes for the podcast if you're listening. Also, it's on the screen right now if you are watching live, so you can check that out there. So what I always ask every guest as well, so what are your favorite RPGs that we've not talked about already and that are not D&D? So what games do you have that you would recommend there?
I'm going to recommend two. One of them is a one-pager by a chap called Ursi Dice, and it's called Jump the Shark. It's a free role-playing game, and
great.
it's about what happens in the TV series after the first two seasons, which were great, and then it's Jump the Shark. It is lovely mechanics, brilliant game. I've written a review of it on my website, so go and find out about it there. There's also a whole bunch of one-page games by G.S. Howitt, which are brilliant fun. And I've written about those because I want other people to find them and play them because they're super. And the other one I've enjoyed a lot recently is Brindlewood Bay, which I know has just been on Kickstarter recently, where
I've
you
not heard
play.
of it.
You must look it up. You're playing elderly women. It's like Murder She Wrote meets Call of Cthulhu.
Amazing.
You get to play elderly women who are investigating ordinary crimes. There's some secret problems going on behind the scenes. That's the kind of the bit of the mythos bit. The mechanics for the mysteries are that a mystery isn't decided by the referee. You find clues and then you work out what you think an answer might be, and then you roll to see if that's the actual answer. And you can fearlessly do things, because if something happens where you might die, there's a mechanic where you can say, actually, that doesn't die, but you do it by revealing parts of your history. Because you're elderly women, you've got a lot of history. Or you reveal something about your inner life. And it fits, the theme comes together beautifully. The mechanics for the mystery works really well. I absolutely adore playing that game.
There's some great recommendations. Thanks very much for sharing with us. Thanks very much for coming on the show, Alex, and giving it your time to talk about your games. It's been really great having you on, and hopefully we can get some people to have a look at Love and Barbed Wire on your site there and have a game of it. It's certainly something I'm planning on doing as soon as I found out. So thank you very much for everyone who's come along to watch, and thank you very much if you came along with the raid as well and stuck around. Next week we have Vassam we're talking about, which is next week on June the 13th at 10 p.m. BST. But if you cannot wait a whole week, that's no problem. Tomorrow at 3 p.m. ET, we have the Starcross Seaway episode, which is showing up the Level Up Advanced 5th edition system, so you can check that out there. But that's all for now, so thank you very much for coming along and watching the show. And Alex, thanks so much for your time again.
Thank you very much. It's been lovely being here.